I'm Will Beecham, ICIS Chemical Business Deputy Editor, and I'm here with Paul Hodges, Chairman of International Echem. Hello, Paul.
Good morning, Bill.
Paul has written an article on Hurricane Harvey and its aftermath for ICIS Chemical Business, which will be printed and distributed at the EPCA meeting this year. Paul ran an ICI business out of Houston quite a few years ago. So you've got quite a first-hand knowledge of Houston and a kind of idea of the scale of the issues here, I think. And you argue in the article that people are underestimating the long-term impact of Harvey. So I wanted to ask you first of all, what are the main factors you think are stopping Houston returning to business as usual in the longer term?
Thank you, Will. I mean, I lived, as you say, in Houston. In fact, I lived alongside Buffalo Bayou, which has had one of the main flooding episodes. And this week, there's still floods in the neighborhood in which I lived. And you've got about 300,000 homes, they think, that we don't know yet, of course, finally, about 300,000 homes that have been fully wrecked. Obviously, other large numbers of homes that have been partially wrecked. And of course, up to 500,000 cars that have been wrecked. Not to talk about the complete and utter disruption to family life and the deaths, the tragic deaths, over 80 deaths and hundreds injured. So Houston is home to more Fortune 500 company headquarters than any other metropolis apart from New York. So the kind of scale of this on the US economy, if you look at it globally, the Houston metro area is equivalent in size to the economy of Poland or Sweden. This is an enormous impact. And of course, not the whole of Houston is hit, but if 300,000 homes get wiped out almost overnight, you can see that this is not going to be solved quickly.
Mm-hmm. And then in terms of the impact on the US economy, some people think that it could stimulate economic growth because of the reconstruction effort. What are your views on that?
Well, you have to look at how this system works. And the problem is the only flood insurance available is from the federal scheme. Private insurance dropped out. And the limits for the federal scheme are very low. For a house, it's $250,000. For contents, it's $100,000. For a business, it's $500,000 for the building and $500,000 for the equipment. And yeah, that's obviously these days. Those numbers were set 40 years ago. They haven't really changed, so they're wildly out of date. But also, unfortunately, because flood expensive, even that is fairly expensive. Less than 20% of people in Houston have flood insurance, and indeed across Texas and Louisiana. They have wind insurance, which is normally what you get with hurricanes, but they don't have flood insurance. And so, it's only 20% or less of people who are actually going to be able to claim on this. And if you've ever tried to claim on insurance, you know it isn't just a question of sending in a bill and somebody saying, "Oh, here you are." It's months of effort to actually get the money, and of course, with the vast amount of reconstruction that's going on, I mean, even if your house has, quote, only been flooded, you have to tear out all the walls. You have to throw out most of the furniture. If you drive along the Houston suburbs now, they're just filled with what is unfortunately now garbage, which was people's prized possessions. And yes, of course, there will be some stimulus to this, but the disruption is far, far greater than the stimulus effect. And if you go back to Hurricane Sandy, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York did an investigation there. Less than 20%, less than 1 in 5 of businesses actually managed to claim successfully after Hurricane Sandy. I hope it's going to be better in Houston, but precedent doesn't suggest it's going to be good.
So, in your view, do you foresee Houston, the whole city, as being kind of stunted in terms of its ability to function normally for quite some months, or longer term?
I mean, if you look at the companies, I mean, what are CEOs and businesses doing now? they're having to spend an awful lot of time, quite rightly, helping their staff try and get back to some sort of normal. I mean, you can't go to work and operate a plant or work in an office if you're worrying about what's happened to your family and how on earth you're going to rebuild your life. That's always going to be people's first priority. So it's a very long-term thing. Now, Houston is a great can-do place, no doubt about it. They're not going to sit just there and wait. Oh, somebody will come along in the end. No, they're already up and moving, and neighbourhood groups and so on and so forth. So there's an enormous amount of energy going into it. But again, that energy, which would normally have gone into business and going to growing the economy, is now actually trying to get. The best way I think of looking at it is we've had massive wealth destruction on an enormous scale, not just, of course, in Houston, but also with Irma over in Florida. I mean, just one example: the Kennedy Space Center in Florida is still without drinking water after Irma. Can you imagine a state-of-the-art facility like that, with all modern technology, is still today, after Irma, without drinking water? It shows you the scale of this problem.
Do you have any estimate in your head for the amount of GDP growth it might knock off the US economy?
I think that's a game for any number of players, and I think there's almost a more important issue here. If you and I talk in 10 years' time about what do we think was the long-term effect of hurricanes Harvey and Irma, I think that what we'll say is this marks the point at which the chemical industry stops worrying about growth and everything else as being the be-all and end-all of what we've been doing for the last 40 years. Instead, we start to worry, and we're well down the road now in 10 years' time, about sustainability. That how do we move from where we've been, growth, not quite at any cost, but growth is the key driver, to sustainability? Because whether or not you're a climate change skeptic, there are people who are, there are people who aren't. But two big storms like this, a lot of people are going to say that we're just not taking the risk anymore. This is a sea change. We don't need all this new stuff all the time. Let's actually focus on sustainability. And you can see that companies who are already moving in that direction are going to do extremely well. The companies who say we're going to go back to business as usual, GDP will pick up, the Federal Reserve will get growth, well, I think they're going to be disappointed. And the future, therefore, and this is, I think, the long-term impact of Harvey and Irma, is going to change the way we think about business drivers, and sustainability is really going to rocket up the agenda.
Could you just pick out in a bit more detail how sustainability could alter fundamentally chemical industry business models then?
Yes, I think the issue, World Economic Forum, for example, which I serve as a global expert. For the last couple of years, we've been publishing major reports on the new plastics economy, as we call it, with participation from all the majors in this. And what we're saying is, you've got a world where, if we carry on as we are, within a few decades, we're going to have as much weight of plastics in the ocean as weight of fish. And since we published those first reports, there's been more and more concern, not only about waste in the oceans, but also, of course, there's bits of plastic getting into the food chain when we're eating. If we're eating fish and so on, and are we eating bits of plastic? Because plastic doesn't degrade for 300 or 400 years in the ocean. Now, what we're saying in the World Economic Forum is, why don't we look now at recycling, reuse? Why don't we develop more of a service-based business? So people, of course, want to be mobile, for example. But do they all need to buy cars? No. I mean, having a car, as Mr. Ford of Ford Motor Company has said, is a colossal waste of money. You drive it, perhaps on average, for about an hour a day, and yet you're spending $30,000 or $40,000 on it. So the move towards autonomous vehicles and car sharing and so on comes at this same moment. And so companies who are making plastics at the moment, if they start to work with their customers about how to keep cars on the road longer, how to develop business models where instead of everybody owning a car and driving it very occasionally, we have more car, as I say, more car sharing, autonomous vehicles. What does this mean for plastics demand? It means you probably don't sell a lot more plastic, but you probably do sell a lot more service. And keeping the car on the road for longer, that's something where chemical companies can really make a tremendous difference. So I'm very optimistic about the future, but I think the future is going to be quite different over the next 10 and 20 years from the past 20 years.
Paul, thank you very much.
Thank you, Will.